Welcome to the Healthcare Hotseat with Tina D. Badham and Lorie D. Owens, where the people who keep healthcare moving and the people who depend on it finally get a seat at the table. Take your seat. The conversation starts now.
This is the Healthcare Hotseat, and I'm Tina Badham, and today we are opening a conversation that has been pressing on both of us because something is shifting out there, and we can all feel it. Across communities, emergency scenes, and everyday life, we are watching a quiet change take hold. A growing desensitization to trauma, the kind that creeps in slowly and it becomes part of the background. And this is not a political conversation. This isn't about blame. This is about people, about what happens when we are so overstimulated that we stop responding to each other's pain.
And I'm Lorie Owens. Today we're discussing what's happening and how we can combat this. I have a story to share with you on a subject that perfectly highlights this growing epidemic that we're seeing. My husband and I were having coffee a couple mornings ago, and he was sharing with me what his last couple of weeks have been like in emergency services. They've seen a significant uptick, really, in cardiac arrests happening in public. Patient goes down. Clearly, someone calls 911 somewhere along the line, but when they arrive, there's no one guiding them there to direct them to where to go. People are standing around, and the majority of them, unfortunately, are standing there with their phones out, just recording. The patient is laying on the ground, just alone. No one blocking view from people and spectators. Their trauma is just out there for everyone. And something my husband asked, he said, as upsetting as like this makes it for me as an emergency services person, I think, wow, is this, really where we're at? Is this because people don't know what to do? Are they scared?
Yeah. And I think what we're seeing now really, Lorie, is that people, I don't think they're necessarily freezing because they lack compassion, right? I think we can agree on that. It's not a lack of compassion necessarily. I think it's freezing because, our phones, and I keep looking for mine. I forget that we're recording with it. The phone feels like the same. I mean, that's a great example. You just saw me right there. I was reaching for my phone. That's the safest thing for us to reach for. And I think it gives them something to do when they don't necessarily know what to do.
That's right, Tina. It's really a feeling of overwhelm. The phone becomes a shield when moments are just too big for us to take in. And that's where the whole shift really starts to show up.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, filming feels like a form of participation, right? It's like I'm doing something, even though it's not actually helping the person that's right in front of them.
Exactly. It creates an illusion of involvement, but really, someone needs to step in, not just document.
That's right. And that illusion, I think, is changing how we're responding in real time. Watching something through that screen puts a layer really between you and the moment, and it turns that crisis into content, for lack of a better way to say that. And that distance changes how we respond as humans.
It's like people are observing instead of experiencing. And, honestly, Tina, we see it all the time, whether it's happy moments, your kids on stage, instead of taking in the moment, everybody has their phone out recording. Even when we say, hey, we're going to give you this recording for free, we're all doing it. Right? For some reason, we just have that sense of that is what is our safety net. It's going to provide us the documentation of what we experienced, but it does take away our actual experience. And in these situations where there's an actual crisis and there's a trauma, once you're behind that screen, the urgency fades.
Right. And that fading urgency, as talking to your husband, I know has brought out, it brings real consequences with that.
We're exposed to so much trauma, every scroll, every feed, that when something happens in real life, it doesn't hit as hard. It feels like just one more thing. And then we see videos of someone in real danger or even losing their life. It lands differently than it should because our brains are so overloaded.
And I think that's the really scary part. It's not necessarily that people don't care. It's that their minds are just tired. They've seen too much too often, and it dulls that impact of what we're seeing.
Which brings us to how this plays out in crowds.
Exactly. And I think that the classic bystander effect has not gone away. It's changed really drastically. And I think now it's evolved more into someone else is going to help. And it's just easier if I record.
Yes, people assume the crowd will act, but the crowd is assuming the same thing. And this shared assumption leaves people alone when they need help the most.
Right. And there's a difference between knowing how to respond and performing for the camera. Some people default to what they've modeled, which, is filming.
Right. It's not intended to be a malicious act. It's a lack of confidence and culture that rewards capturing the moment instead of stepping into it. And that lack of confidence really shows up in many ways.
That's right. And, I think shifting this into the discussion about healthcare is really important here, too, because healthcare workers, Lorie, have been desensitized for years out of necessity. And I think if you speak to any clinician that has been a clinician for any length of time, they'll tell you alarm fatigue, they hear code blues going on. They become very desensitized to that because it's necessary for them to do that in order to do their job regularly. And I think what's new here, though, is the public experiencing that trauma saturation online. And, John Q. Public is watching it on his phone, and it's continuing to help desensitize them to that trauma out in public. So I think people in general are absorbing that trauma, and they're not getting support when they're absorbing that.
Absolutely. The public doesn't have that training. Clinicians build that emotional armor over time in their experiences. Everyone is carrying emotional weight. We're not built to witness all this global trauma 24/7, whether it's on your Instagram, it's on TV, it's real life situations, it's made up situations.
Right.
Everything is shocking and your brain just shuts down. We are in an emotional overload and numbness becomes survival.
Exactly. That shutdown shows up everywhere. And I think when everything is traumatic, right, when you're looking at it on Instagram or TikTok or wherever it is that you're doing that doom scrolling, as they call it, when everything is showing that trauma, nothing is going to feel urgent after that. I think we as a society lose our ability to recognize when something is dangerous.
And it affects how they cope and advocate.
Absolutely. We see those ripple effects in healthcare every day. Families that don't recognize emergencies when they're happening, people delaying care just because they feel overwhelmed and don't really know where to go. Clinicians, they feel numb because of the overload that they have on them.
Exactly. That numbness changes outcomes for everyone. It affects advocacy and it impacts how clinicians cope too.
Right. It shapes the entire care experience.
So let's shift into something empowering. What can and should in those first moments in an emergency situation? And I'm talking about practical, non-clinical steps for everyday people, Tina.
Right, because you don't have to be a clinician to save a life. There are simple steps that any person can take in those situations.
Yes, these steps are safe and simple. Everyone can make a difference. So let's walk through them. The first thing, check to see if they're breathing.
Right. You're looking for the chest movement or the responsiveness.
If you're unsure, assume they're not breathing and move to the next step, which is call 911. Put it on speaker so you can use your hands.
The dispatchers at 911 are trained and they are going to guide you step by step. The next thing you want to do is you're going to want to make sure the airway is clear and that person is safe. You want to check for anything that's blocking their nose or their mouth.
And you're not doing anything advanced, just ensuring safety. If you don't know CPR, ask if anyone nearby does. Shout it out. Does anyone know CPR?
Exactly. People often freeze until somebody gives them direction. So the next thing you want to do is check to see if there's a pulse. And if not, start chest compressions. You don't have to be perfect at this, just start them. If you're not comfortable with giving mouth to mouth, that's okay. The chest compressions alone are still an effective measure.
Absolutely. And if somebody else is nearby, make sure that you are switching out with someone if you get tired, generally about a 2-minute cycle. There's also a great app out there called Pulse Point. It's available to anyone, but you can also search Pulse Point on your phone and find the closest AED device in public spaces.
Absolutely. And AEDs literally tell you what to do. They are made for everyday people to use. Next, you want to make sure, and this is so vital, and I know Lorie, especially with her husband being in emergency services, will agree with this, make a clear path for emergency services personnel. Move people back, open doors, turn on lights.
Exactly, Tina. That gives precious seconds to the emergency crews when they arrive and can truly make the difference in life or death. So now I want to shift to some other solutions. Tina, we are always solutions focused.
That's right, Lorie. I just want to point out, just tie up that conversation from before, that everybody is not numb, but numbness is becoming more common. When trauma is constant, especially when we're watching real people in real danger on our screens all the time, our reactions are going to shift. We don't jump as quickly. We don't feel as deeply in the moment as we used to.
Absolutely. And that shift matters. It changes how we show up for each other when it really counts. So the question becomes, how do we shift back?
Right. The antidote is presence. Put the phone down. Be willing to be uncomfortable and be willing to act.
And remembering that real help often happens off camera. It's human to human, not screen to screen.
And that, I think, is where we want to leave people today, with the reminder that presence still matters.
We can't change the world, but we can change how we show up. Showing compassion over content and connection over clicks. Remember that the smallest steps can make the biggest difference.
And so before we wrap up, we really appreciate your continued support. Make sure that you're subscribed to our podcast and follow us on all of our social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, X, TikTok, all of them. So that way you're never going to miss an episode or a conversation that we have that may matter.
And don't forget, Tina, Spotify.
That's right. We're also on Spotify.
Share this episode with someone who needs it. A caregiver, a clinician, a family member, or anyone who's ever felt overwhelmed by the world we're living in.
Right. And share your thoughts in the comments. We want real conversation, different perspectives, and honest reactions. This matters for us as a community and as human beings, trying to make sense of moments like this. We just want you to know that your voice truly matters here.
As always, we thank you so much for joining us. And until our next time together, remember to stay curious, stay informed, and stay in the hot seat.